hyperbola and the ellipse is the minus sign. You see minus between x squared or in front of either x squared or y squared, you should know automatically that that is a hyperbola. Okay? So we'll have circles, ellipse, and hyperbola, and I just took all the parabolas off because we're out of time. Okay? So, language here. A transverse axis is what we call the major axis in a hyperbola. It's not a major axis because it doesn't go through the figure. A hyperbola is not a closed figure. It's either going to open and this way, or this way and this way. So it is kind of an ellipse cut in half and shifted. So the transverse axis is what we're going to call the major one.
How many questions have you drawn?
3, I believe, but I'll look. It may be fewer than that. There are 28 questions on the test. Okay? So, because this minus is for the y, I can see that this is going to go like this. If it was y squared minus x squared, it would be the opposite. Okay? So this is minus y squared, and this one is minus x squared. Okay? So sometimes you might see y squared over 25 minus x squared over 16 or whatever, and then you know that that's going to go in that direction. So let's go ahead and kind of break this down now. We have the transverse axis is by the x. So I know that this box, because you start out graphing a rectangle, and so the A is not always bigger. The A is under the positive one. Okay? So the A in this case is 3. And it's under the x-axis, so I'm just going to count out 3. Okay, so this is where my transverse axis. Oh, what's the center of this one? 0, 0. So it follows the same guidelines as the circle and the ellipse, and even the parabola, which we haven't made it to yet. B is going to be 25, the square root of 25, which is 5, right? Now, remember in the other one, it had a Pythagorean relationship, but A was the hypotenuse. In this one, C is again the hypotenuse. So they're just trying to mess you up, okay? But bottom line is we add these this time to find C, because what's going to happen is in the hyperbola, the focus points are going to be bigger than the A's, okay? So they are going to change in a greater amount. So with that Pythagorean relationship, what is C this time? And it's 9 plus 25, what is that? 34, so C is the square root of 34, and we can't simplify that, can we? 2 times 17? No. Okay? So the foci is going to be rotated by this amount from the center. So it's actually going to be out here and out here. But we'll get to that again in just a minute. So to do C for the hyperbola, you must add. Okay? In the ellipse, you had to do what? Okay. All right? So still a Pythagorean relationship. So A was 3, so from the center we counted left 3 and right 3, and B is 5, so we're going to go up 5 and down 5. So now what happens is we have created this rectangle. Do you see the rectangle? Do you see the rectangle? And so what happens now is you must make asymptotes using this rectangle. So your rectangle establishes, what's an asymptote?
That's exactly what I was talking about. Isn't it like when it doesn't touch the
Okay, so it gets closer and closer and closer to that line, but it does not cross it. Okay, unless you have a jump asymptote, which some of you are going into calculus are going to talk about jump asymptotes, but we don't have to talk about that here. Okay, so this rectangle helps us to establish the asymptotes. So here are the asymptotes. And I have to come over here because it needs to be a straight line. And I want it to be kind of accurate. So let's see if we can get that straight line going through here. If you want to use a ruler, I have some in that computer pouches back there. I only want to move to this end. There you go. Okay, so you see my asymptote here, okay? And the other asymptote is going to go in the other direction. So it's going to go down here.
Wait, so what is it not supposed to touch then?
This is not the hyperbola. This is just the asymptotes for the hyperbola. So now I'm getting ready to show you the actual hyperbola. We've just created the skeleton for the hyperbola.
But I thought you said asymptotes aren't supposed to touch.
Right. So here's the actual hyperbola. The vertex is going to go here, and it's going to travel this way, never touching this line, and this way, never touching this line. So it's kind of a sideways parabola. So there are your asymptotes. So this line continues, and the hyperbola will never touch it. This line continues, and the hyperbola gets closer and closer and closer and never touches it. And it does the same thing on this side. This is the vertex, and it goes like this, and goes around, and it goes like this, and goes around. Okay? So the red is actually the hyperbola. The blue is kind of our skeleton to hold or draw the hyperbola. Okay? So what is the square root of 34 again? But give me an estimate. It's between 5 and 6? Closer to 6, right? So isn't the focus point going to be right here and right here at the negative square root of 34, 0, and the square root of 34, 0 for my focus points, right? So if the center of my figure was not 0, 0, then it would change just like the ellipse changed, right? You would add to the x value of the center and subtract from the x value of the center the amount of c. Correct? All right, how do you feel? If we're going the other way, here is a picture. What is the equation in standard form and what are the foci? So what's the center? Let's start there. Isn't the center 0, 0? Okay, so it's just going to be x squared and y squared. Everybody understands that, right? What is A and what is B? And remember, this one has to be y squared minus x squared. How do I know that? Because it's opening up and down. So the y-axis has to be the transverse axis. Okay? So y, under the y is 5 squared. A is 5. So under the y has to be 25. And under the b, under the x squared, the b squared has to be 9. So far, so good? I counted the rectangle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that gave me A is 5.
Oh.
And B is 3. Right? Okay, so I have the equation. The other question says, what are the foci? How do I do the foci? I need to do what? Add or subtract this time? I need to add. So it's going to be 25 plus 9 equals, again, 34. So this one was very much like the other one. So C is the square root of 34. So the foci this time are going to be changed from the center, 0, 0. And which one do I change this time? The X term or the Y term? The Y term, because the foci, remember, have to be inside the parabola. So it's going to be right there. And that makes sense, doesn't it? So it's going to be 0 square root of 34, which is between 5 and 6, and 0 negative square root of 34, which is between 5 and 6. Is that better? Okay. How do you feel about hyperbola? Not too bad?